Lisa and the Devil was never meant to behave like a conventional horror film. It drifted, circled, and whispered like a memory trying to reassemble itself. Mario Bava shaped it as a shimmering hallucination, a place where mannequins resemble the living, where hallways bleed into one another, and where time behaves like an unreliable witness. Its production unfolded under shifting scripts, vanished explanations, and a mansion that seemed determined to alter every scene filmed inside it. Why did Bava build a story that dissolves the closer you look? And why does the film feel as though it remembers something the audience has forgotten? These are 20 strange truths hidden inside Lisa and the Devil. Fact 1. The origins of Lisa and the Devil began not with a script, but with an image Bava could not shake. A woman wandering a place that seemed to remember her better than she remembered herself. He built the film outward from that sensation, an emotional compass rather than a narrative blueprint. Collaborators recalled that his early notes were filled with sketches of rooms that stretched impossibly long, of figures frozen mid-gesture, and of faces half hidden by shadow as though they were retreating from recognition. Bava insisted the story should feel like a dream trying to stabilize, yet constantly slipping back into abstraction. He avoided explaining motivations, believing that words would restrict what images could express more powerfully. During pre-production, he walked through the Toledo mansion alone for hours, tracing routes that appeared to loop back on themselves, convinced the building held the architecture of memory he needed. He told his crew that Lisa's journey wasn't about discovery but about repetition, about confronting echoes of events she might not realize she was repeating. The atmosphere he cultivated extended beyond the film's look. Actors were encouraged to avoid internalizing a fixed interpretation of their characters, allowing their performances to drift subtly from scene to scene. Even the camera movements reinforced this disorientation, gliding as if pulled by an invisible current rather than following traditional blocking. What emerged was a cinematic world that resisted clarity by design. Audiences weren't meant to decode its symbols so much as feel the unease of drifting through them. The film's earliest drafts may have contained a more structured progression, but Bava gradually stripped them away, leaving behind only the emotional residue that mattered most to him. Lisa and the Devil became a story built from mood, silence, and shifting identities, a tale where the past leaks into the present until neither can be reliably separated. Fact 2. The Toledo mansion chosen for the film shaped far more than its setting. It dictated the film's logic, rhythm, and emotional gravity. Bava believed the house possessed a personality contradictory, self-contained, and quietly watchful, and he insisted on allowing its eccentricities to steer the production. The building's architecture was notoriously inconsistent. Staircases ended abruptly against blank walls, hallways narrowed without warning, and certain rooms felt eerily colder, regardless of time or lighting. These irregularities frustrated the crew but delighted Bava, who saw them as natural expressions of the film's fractured reality. He often rearranged shooting plans based on what the mansion suggested to him, sometimes abandoning carefully prepared lighting setups in favor of spontaneous compositions dictated by reflections, shadows, or unexpected symmetry. Cast members reported sensations of déjà vu while navigating the space, returning to rooms they believed they had seen before, only to discover they had entered from a different direction or under unfamiliar light. The mansion's acoustics added to the tension. Whispers carried through the corridors long after the speakers had left, creating the impression of unseen presences. Even mundane noises, creaking beams, settling stone became unsettling when amplified by cavernous chambers. Bava incorporated these quirks directly into his visual plan, designing shots that emphasized the building's unnatural proportions and its tendency to distort perspective. He believed the mansion represented the interior landscape of Lisa's mind, a physical manifestation of her confusion and fractured identity. As filming progressed, crew members began referring to the house as a collaborator rather than a location, acknowledging how its unpredictable nature shaped every decision. Whether mystical or merely architectural, the mansion infused the film with a sense of spatial instability that became one of its defining characteristics. In many ways, it didn't just host the story, it authored it alongside Bava. Fact 3. The mannequins that populate Lisa and the Devil have long fascinated viewers, yet their creation was as unsettling as their presence on screen. Bava rejected the idea of using standard department store figures, insisting that the mannequins should feel like remnants of real people, bodies suspended at the moment identity begins to fade. To achieve this, Sculptors cast molds from actual crew members, capturing minute imperfections that gave the figures an uncanny lifelikeness. The process was grueling. Volunteers stood still for extended periods while plaster crept across their skin, creating a sensation several described as suffocating. Some molds failed and had to be repeated, amplifying the physical and psychological strain. Once completed, the figures were finished with layers of wax-tinted resin, giving their surfaces a translucent depth that responded eerily to light. Bava often positioned them to mirror the actor's gestures, prompting viewers to question where humanity ended and objecthood began. During production, the mannequins developed a reputation for unpredictability. Crew members found them shifted slightly between takes, an arm angled differently. A head rotated a few degrees, though no one recalled moving them. Storage rooms where they were kept became places of quiet dread. Technicians avoided entering alone, claiming the figures seemed to watch with their glassy, unblinking eyes. Bava encouraged this discomfort, believing genuine unease would translate into the performances. He arranged scenes so characters moved among the mannequins, as if navigating a gallery of forgotten selves, each figure a distorted echo of something they feared becoming. Scholars later argued that the mannequins symbolize memory trapped in physical form, preserved yet deteriorating, present yet unreachable. Their presence grounds the film's theme of identity erosion, reinforcing the idea that Lisa's world is populated not by ghosts, but by abandoned versions of the living. In their stillness lies the true horror, the possibility that the line between the animate and the inanimate is far thinner than we imagine. Fact 4. Elke Sommer recalled that working on Lisa and the Devil felt like slipping into a reality that changed shape every time she tried to understand it. Bava discouraged analytical preparation, urging her instead to lean into confusion, to let uncertainty guide her reactions. He believed Lisa should seem perpetually on the brink of remembering something crucial, and Sommer's instinctive responses became essential to that effect. She was frequently given script pages moments before filming, sometimes rewritten so drastically that scenes no longer connected to the emotional beats she had built earlier. The result was a performance defined by raw immediacy, fear, hesitation, and curiosity unfolding in real time. Bava also manipulated staging to preserve this vulnerability. He positioned mannequins unexpectedly, altered lighting without warning, and instructed other actors to enter silently from outside. Sommer's field of vision, these surprises pushed her into genuine startle responses that Bava captured with quiet precision. Crew members noticed she developed a habit of scanning corners between takes, as if anticipating the next disorienting shift. Yet Sommer later admitted that this unpredictability helped her inhabit Lisa's fractured psyche more authentically than any traditional rehearsal could. Her portrayal carries a tension not rooted in scripted danger, but in the sense that the world itself refuses to hold still around her. The mansion's labyrinthine corridors, the mannequin's frozen expressions, and Savalas's calm, cryptic presence all fed into a landscape where every step felt like an intrusion. In this environment, Sommer didn't simply play a woman caught in a nightmare. She moved as if the nightmare were shaping itself around her, molding her reactions into the emotional architecture of the film. Fact 5. The soundscape of Lisa and the Devil became an invisible character, haunting the film with textures that seemed to breathe, whisper, and pulse beneath every scene. Composer Carlo Savina abandoned traditional melodies in favor of sonic fragments. Isolated violin strokes, warped organ tones, and percussive echoes stretched until they hovered between music and noise. Bava requested that the score feel half-remembered, like something overheard long ago and now returning in distorted form. To achieve this, Savina recorded instruments in cavernous spaces where reverberation created ghostly after-images of each note. He then manipulated these recordings, slowing them, reversing them, or layering them off-tempo to create a sense of dislocation. But the most uncanny sounds came from the mansion itself. Microphones placed deep within its hallways captured footsteps that continued long after the crew had stopped walking, as well as faint moans of shifting stone that resembled distant human sighs. These noises, unintentional yet inexplicably rhythmic, became integral to the film's atmosphere. Savina incorporated them selectively, allowing the line between diegetic and musical sound to blur so thoroughly that viewers could no longer determine which elements belonged to the house and which were crafted. Even silence became expressive. Long stretches of near quiet, thickened with subtle hums and low frequencies that seemed to vibrate against the characters' emotions. The cumulative effect was an auditory maze in which every noise suggested a presence just beyond sight. Critics later argued that the film's sound design was years ahead of its time, influencing later experiments in psychological horror. In Lisa and the Devil, sound does not accompany fear, it anticipates it, shaping the spaces. Lisa wanders before she ever recognizes she is lost. Fact 6. The evolving script of Lisa and the Devil reflected Bava's shifting creative impulses, transforming from a relatively linear supernatural story into an elliptical labyrinth of symbolic fragments. Early drafts outlined a plot with clear motivations and defined character arcs, but Bava soon abandoned these constraints. Feeling they imposed a logic incompatible with the emotions he wanted to explore, he reworked scenes nightly, sometimes discarding entire narrative threads while retaining isolated images or gestures that resonated with him. This approach left co-writer Alfredo Leone scrambling to maintain continuity. Yet Bava insisted that coherence would diminish the film's dreamlike pull. Actors often arrived on set to discover that their characters' intentions had changed overnight, or that scenes filmed earlier would now appear later or not at all in the final structure. Telly Savalas adapted quickly, treating each scene as a standalone parable, responding to tone rather than plot. Editors later discovered multiple variations of key moments, each shot with different emotional textures, as though Bava were testing alternate realities. During post-production, Bava reshuffled scenes repeatedly, removing transitional beats so the film would drift rather than progress. This deliberate fragmentation forced viewers to assemble meaning from atmosphere rather than exposition. Some critics accused him of sacrificing clarity for style, but Bava believed that horror, rooted in explanation, loses its power. In his vision, Lisa's journey was not about uncovering truth, but about experiencing the dissolution of certainty itself. The final film bears the marks of this philosophy, a narrative that folds in on itself, where images recur like déjà vu and characters behave as if guided by memories that the audience cannot access. The script became not a roadmap, but a living document, one that reshaped itself until it resembled the very dreamscape the film sought to evoke. Fact 7. Telly Savalas approached his role with a deliberate ambiguity that aligned perfectly with Bava's desire for a figure who existed outside ordinary narrative causality. Rather than portraying the butler as a character with personal motives, Savalas treated him as an agent of inevitability, someone who appears when the story bends, not when logic calls for him. Bava fed this interpretation by giving Savalas only fragments of the script, sometimes withholding entire sequences, so his reactions would emerge from instinct rather than analysis. Savalas embraced this unpredictability, adopting a calm, measured rhythm of movement that contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding Lisa. His decision to use the lollipop, later iconic in Kojak, emerged spontaneously during a rehearsal break, but Bava instantly recognized its value, a gesture that softened the butler's presence while making him even more unsettling. On set, Savalas often improvised small acts of care toward the mannequins, straightening clothing, brushing dust from a cheek, or pausing beside them as though listening for something. These gestures, though not scripted, deepened the sense that he knew truths the other characters could not perceive. Co-stars described feeling watched even when he stood silently at the frame's edge, an effect Bava enhanced by placing him in compositions that made him appear both present and detached. Editors later noticed that his footage aligned uncannily with story beats he could not have anticipated during filming, reinforcing the myth that Savalas somehow intuited the emotional architecture Bava kept hidden. Whether coincidence or instinct, his performance anchors the film with an eerie serenity. The butler becomes not a guide or antagonist, but a quiet force shepherding characters toward outcomes already written. In a film defined by uncertainty, Savalas embodies certainty itself, the calm presence waiting at the end of every corridor, unhurried because he knows everyone eventually arrives where he stands. Fact 8. Déjà vu became an unexpected phenomenon during the film's production, not just for the characters, but for the cast and crew themselves. Because Bava continuously reshaped the script and restructured scenes, actors often found themselves performing moments that echoed sequences they had already filmed, sometimes with identical blocking but entirely different emotional tone. Sommer recalled entering a hallway she was certain they had used earlier, only to be told this section of the mansion had never been lit for camera before. Crew members experienced similarly disorienting incidents, light patterns recurring despite changed setups, props appearing in positions undocumented by continuity notes, and echoes of footsteps continuing long after movement ceased. A camera assistant once reported seeing Sommer walk past a doorway twice in what he believed was a single continuous shot, though playback showed only one pass. Bava, rather than dismissing these experiences, folded them into his creative philosophy. He encouraged the team to treat the mansion as a space where time looped subtly, where actions repeated with slight variations, blurring the line between memory and experience. This approach influenced editing as well. Certain scenes were cut to mimic déjà vu, introducing micro-repetitions or mirrored angles that made viewers feel the world shifting beneath them. For actors, the sensation became increasingly pronounced. Savalas remarked that he often felt he had already delivered lines before seeing them on the revised pages. Even technicians conceded that the production seemed to slip into patterns, as though the film were guiding them rather than the other way around. Over time, the déjà vu transformed from an inconvenience into a thematic engine, reinforcing the film's core tension, a reality folding inward, repeating fragments of itself, as if trapped in a loop that no one fully recognized until they were already inside it. Fact 9. The mannequins, already central to the film's imagery, became catalysts for disturbing incidents that blurred the line between prop malfunction and something stranger. During consecutive night shoots, technicians noticed figures left in the dining hall had subtly changed positions. By morning, a tilted chin here, a shifted shoulder there, though no one admitted to moving them. Initially chalked up to pranks or fatigue, the pattern persisted enough to unsettle even the most practical crew members. A production manager conducted an inventory one evening, only to discover the next morning that one mannequin had vanished. It reappeared hours later in a sealed room used for abandoned set pieces, with no explanation for how it got inside. Sound operators captured faint taps during takes, rhythmic enough to suggest intentional patterning. Yet the noises continued even during complete stillness on set. Mannequins seemed especially reactive to temperature changes, with wax skins cracking in rooms that remained inexplicably cold despite lighting rigs that should have raised the temperature. The most alarming moment occurred when a mannequin collapsed mid-scene, its torso splitting open along a line that appeared too clean to be structural failure. Examination revealed no weakness in its construction. Bava outwardly dismissed these events, but privately instructed crew members to treat the mannequins gently, almost reverently, as though acknowledging their unnerving presence. Actors began performing with heightened tension whenever scenes required proximity to them. Aware that stillness does not necessarily mean safety, scholars later argued that these off-camera events contributed to the film's emotional authenticity, infusing every interaction with a subtle dread. Whether mechanical accidents, human oversight, or something less tangible, the mannequins commanded a respect that grew into quiet fear, a presence that shaped not only the film's iconography but the psychological state of everyone who worked beside them. Fact 10. The transformation of Lisa and the Devil into the House of Exorcism stands as one of the most drastic and divisive studio interventions in European horror cinema. When American distributors realized Bava's enigmatic, dreamlike narrative could not ride the wave of possession-themed box office hits, they orchestrated a complete overhaul. Their strategy was simple: graft a commercially viable storyline onto Bava's footage, regardless of thematic coherence. To execute this, they commissioned new scenes centered on exorcism rituals, lurid manifestations, and medical examinations that bore no emotional relationship to the original performances. Elke Sommer was brought back months after principal photography, required to embody a character that contradicted the Lisa she had crafted under Bava's guidance. The tonal shift was staggering, her delicate sense of disorientation replaced by ferocious outbursts and physical torment. Editors were instructed to intercut these new sequences with Bava's original material, creating a jarring narrative that fractured the film's internal logic. The hybrid structure attempted to present the dreamlike world as visions inside a possessed woman's mind, a reductive explanation that undermined the ambiguity Bava valued. When he finally viewed the re-edited cut, Bava was reportedly devastated, recognizing that the emotional architecture he had constructed had been reshaped into something sensationalist and literal. Critics were initially split. Some embraced the added shock value, while others condemned the intrusion as artistic vandalism. Over time, scholars recontextualized the dual versions as evidence of two irreconcilable philosophies, one favoring commercial clarity, the other emotional resonance. Ironically, the studio's attempt to capitalize on a trend only amplified interest in Bava's original vision. Today, the existence of both cuts invites ongoing debate about authorship, integrity, and the fragility of cinematic identity. Fact 11. Elke Sommer's return for the reshoots demanded for the House of Exorcism plunged her into a physically and psychologically grueling process that contrasted sharply with the intuitive, atmospheric work she had done under Bava. The new material required her to perform aggressive possession sequences, violent contortions, desperate screams, and confrontations staged for shock rather than emotional truth. Gone was the quiet, drifting uncertainty that had anchored Lisa's inner turmoil. In its place stood a performance rooted in bodily exhaustion and relentless intensity. Sommer endured hours strapped to metal frames, heat from studio lights, blistering makeup designed to simulate bruising and spiritual decay. Adhesives used for prosthetics irritated her skin, while repeated takes strained her voice to the point of temporary damage. She admitted years later that the psychological whiplash was even more taxing. The reshoots forced her to inhabit a persona entirely disconnected from Bava's interpretation, leaving her with the creeping sense that she was erasing her own earlier work. Cast and crew sensed her discomfort, noting how she often withdrew between takes, silently studying monitors as if attempting to reconcile two incompatible versions of herself. The chaos of the reshoots also infected the editing process. Her expressions from one emotional register sometimes collided with footage from the other, creating a fractured portrait that mirrored the film's splintered identity. Though Sommer delivered a fierce commitment to the material, she remained conflicted about the hybrid film, unsure whether her efforts honored or overshadowed the performance she had crafted with Bava. In retrospect, her dual portrayals reflect the film's broader struggle between artistic intention and commercial manipulation, an internal divide visible in every frame that juxtaposes vulnerability with violence. Fact 12. The editing suite where Lisa and the Devil was reshaped into its American counterpart became the site of a prolonged creative battle, revealing both the power and the peril of post-production. Editors were tasked with merging incompatible footage, Bava's elliptical dreamscape, and the reshoot's exorcism-driven melodrama into a single, coherent narrative. The mandate required aggressive experimentation, flipping shots to create impossible spatial relationships, inserting reaction close-ups from unrelated scenes, and layering sound cues designed to override the emotional subtleties of the original performances. To forge connections the story never intended, editors rearranged chronology, turning symbolic moments into literal visions and grafting new motivations onto characters who had none. Voiceovers attempted to impose explanations where ambiguity once thrived, yet these additions often contradicted the visual language Bava had meticulously constructed. The most controversial choice involved replacing Bava's enigmatic ending with a climactic exorcism sequence that reframed the entire film as a psychological break, rather than a metaphysical descent. Archival research decades later revealed that some reels had been spliced so aggressively that frames from different takes appeared within the same second of footage, creating micro-jumps that subtly destabilized the film's rhythm. Restoration teams studying surviving prints found multiple variations of scenes, evidence of frantic attempts to force cohesion onto two incompatible visions. For many scholars, the hybrid film represents not simply a compromised version of Bava's work, but a case study in how editing can redefine meaning, intention, and emotional tone. Yet, the existence of both cuts serves a paradoxical purpose. It highlights the resilience of Bava's imagery, which continues to assert itself even when submerged beneath layers of imposed narrative. In the tension between these versions, viewers witness cinema's vulnerability and its enduring capacity to resist complete control. Fact 13. Elke Sommer often spoke of Lisa and the Devil as a film that lingered with her far longer than any role she had taken before, not because of its horror elements, but because of the emotional dissonance embedded in its creation. Under Bava's direction, she inhabited Lisa through instinct and atmosphere rather than concrete motivation. drifting through scenes as though the world were shaping itself around her rather than the other way around. This approach demanded an unusual openness, an abandonment of certainty that left her feeling porous, vulnerable to the film's tone. After production ended, she experienced recurring dreams of winding staircases, mannequins arranged like mourners, and Savalas's soft footfalls approaching from behind. These dreams were not frightening in the traditional sense. Instead, they carried the weight of something unfinished, as though her subconscious still wandered the mansion's shifting corridors. The later reshoots only deepened this unease. Being asked to return months later to portray a violently possessed version of Lisa fractured her sense of continuity, leaving her disconnected from the emotional truth she had built with Bava. She once admitted that watching clips from the two versions felt like watching two different women share the same face. Interviews revealed her discomfort with discussing the film, as if articulating its impact might resurrect the uncertainty she had worked hard to leave behind. Scholars have since argued that Sommer's lingering tension mirrors the film's own themes of identity erosion and existential looping. In a sense, she became an extension of Lisa's journey, caught between interpretations, haunted not by the supernatural, but by the experience of embodying a character who never truly resolves. Her performance endures precisely because of this fracture. It carries the resonance of someone navigating a world that refused to tell her who she was meant to be. Fact 14. The Toledo mansion's unsettling history proved to be more than a backdrop. It became an active force in shaping the film's atmosphere, both on screen and behind the scenes. Long before Bava selected it, the estate had undergone a succession of abrupt ownership changes, each departure shrouded in vague explanations and fragmented documentation. Local historians describe the structure as restless, a term suggesting not supernatural haunting, but psychological disorientation. Upon arrival, the crew encountered a building whose architecture seemed to contradict itself, staircases that narrowed inexplicably, rooms that appeared misaligned with the mansion's exterior, and galleries whose acoustics swallowed sound as though the air itself absorbed it. Technical teams struggled with erratic electrical malfunctions, particularly in areas central to key scenes. Despite recent upgrades intended to stabilize the system, temperature fluctuations were equally troubling. Corridors warmed unexpectedly, while adjacent chambers remained icy, forcing the wardrobe department to prepare alternate costumes to accommodate the shifts. Contractors hired to reinforce certain sections reported disorientation severe enough to halt work, claiming that time passed inconsistently while inside the house. Local rumors added fuel to the building's mystique. Tales that the mansion's original architect had embedded symbolic geometry into its layout, not for spiritual protection, but to mirror cyclical patterns believed to influence human behavior. Though unverifiable, the rumor resonated with the mansion's peculiar design, which lent itself naturally to Bava's looping visual motifs. Crew members increasingly avoided the upper galleries after dark, convinced the shadows lingered too long after movement ceased. Whether the mansion's influence stemmed from flawed engineering, psychological suggestion, or something subtler, its presence permeated the production. It became more than a location, it became a collaborator, shaping the film's tone and leaving a residual unease that followed several crew members long after filming concluded. Fact 15. The legend of a mannequin curse surrounding Lisa and the devil gained traction not through sensationalism, but through a gradual accumulation of small, deeply unsettling incidents. The first occurred when a prop handler collapsed while transporting a mannequin torso, convinced moments before fainting that the figure had shifted its weight against him. Though attributed to exhaustion, the story spread quickly among the crew, who were already wary of the figure's uncanny realism. A scenic painter later reported sudden vertigo after spending hours in a storage room filled with mannequin heads, describing a rhythmic sensation as though the figures were inhaling together. More troubling was the wardrobe assistant, who insisted that one mannequin's waxy hand felt inexplicably warm despite the room's frigid temperature. While rational explanations existed, poor ventilation, lighting anomalies, or stress, these incidents accumulated enough to foster a quiet superstition on set. A shipment of mannequins sent to Rome for promotional photos intensified the rumor. When several arrived, cracked down the torso, their wax coatings split in symmetrical patterns that suggested internal pressure rather than external damage. The transportation team denied mishandling the crates, Bava publicly dismissed the curse but privately instructed his assistants to treat the mannequins as if they were fragile souls, a comment that blurred the line between jest and sincerity. Over the years, collectors who acquired surviving props noted the same disquieting lifelikeness, claiming the figures seemed to change subtly in expression, depending on lighting. Scholars argue the curse persists because the mannequins symbolize the film's deepest fear, the erosion of identity until only a hollow shell remains. Whether haunted or merely superbly crafted, the mannequins exert a psychological gravity that refuses to fade, embodying the film's strange power long after the cameras stopped rolling. Fact 16. Mario Bava's manipulation of time in Lisa and the Devil is one of the film's most elusive qualities, achieved not through overt narrative devices, but through subtle ruptures embedded in the visual design. Bava believed that horror manifests when the mind senses a fracture between experience and expectation, so he crafted scenes that appear to replay themselves with imperceptible variations. Footsteps echo a moment too early. Shadows stretch in directions that contradict visible light. Camera movements glide along arcs that feel familiar before revealing a slightly altered angle, as though the viewer has slipped into an adjacent version of the same event. Cinematographer Cecilio Paniagua later remarked that Bava encouraged beautiful mistakes, reflections allowed to distort perspective, focus shifts permitted to linger a beat too long because these imperfections created a quiet instability. Even color grading served this intention. Warm hues seeped into frames meant to feel cold, while unnatural blues dominated scenes that should signal safety, creating subtle emotional dissonance. Architecture reinforced the temporal drift. Identical doorframes filmed from different positions created the illusion of recursive spaces, while repeated compositions suggested that Lisa was moving in circles even when the story implied forward motion. Actors were directed to pause an extra second before responding to cues, producing micro-delays that unsettled natural rhythm. Bava's ultimate goal wasn't to confuse viewers, but to make them feel suspended between moments, trapped in a temporal threshold where events fold back on themselves. This sensation becomes integral to Lisa's journey. Her world doesn't simply unravel, it loops, frays, and repeats, each cycle thinning the boundary between memory and present experience. By the film's end, time no longer behaves as a sequence but as a haunting, an echo chasing itself through the mansion's corridors. Fact 17. The enigmatic presence of Telly Savalas's butler gains much of its power from Bava's refusal to anchor the character in a single interpretation. Neither villain nor guide, he operates like a figure who has stepped out of another narrative entirely, moving through the mansion with a serenity that suggests foreknowledge. Bava instructed Savalas to imagine the butler as someone who arrives before the moment begins, a paradox that Savalas embodied through stillness rather than exposition. He often appeared on set early, positioning himself silently in corners long before cameras rolled, allowing other actors to wander into his presence naturally. This unpredictability created an atmosphere where his entrances felt less like cues and more like manifestations. The iconic lollipop became an emblem of this ambivalence, a gesture of casual comfort masking an undercurrent of inevitability. Savalas occasionally improvised small, unsettling actions, gently adjusting a mannequin's posture, brushing dust from its lips, or pausing as though listening to something the audience could not hear. These touches transformed him from a household servant into a curator of memory, tending to the frozen figures with a tenderness that blurred into possession. Scholars later argued that he embodies the film's governing logic, a force that shepherds characters toward outcomes they cannot comprehend. His calmness is not indifference but recognition. He moves with the certainty of someone who has witnessed the story many times before. Lisa's unease around him stems not from fear, but from the faint awareness that he interprets her actions within a framework she cannot access. In a narrative defined by fragmentation, Savalas becomes the one stable presence, a quiet anchor whose inscrutable smile suggests he already knows where every corridor leads and who will meet Lisa at whichever ending she chooses. Fact 18. The mannequins in Lisa and the Devil serve not merely as props, but as embodiments of the film's central motif, identity suspended on the brink of dissolution. Bava conceived them as echoes of human presence, representations of lives paused in a moment of emotional collapse. Neither alive nor fully abandoned, he instructed sculptors to eschew symmetry, incorporating flaws into each figure that hinted at internal turmoil: a crooked eyelid, a misaligned jaw, a faint crease suggesting tension that wax could not explain. These imperfections allowed the mannequins to mirror the characters in unsettling ways. In several scenes, their postures subtly correspond to Lisa's emotional state, creating visual rhymes that viewers register subconsciously. Bava positioned them in clusters resembling frozen tableau lovers locked in perpetual distance, mourners bent toward absent grief, transforming the mansion into a gallery of suspended narratives. Actors reported feeling watched during scenes involving the mannequins, an unease heightened by lighting techniques that produced reflections mimicking eye movement. Bava used these illusions deliberately, believing that horror arises when the boundary between subject and object becomes porous. Scholars later interpreted the mannequins as manifestations of memory stripped of agency, bodies preserved after meaning has evaporated. Their presence anticipates Lisa's own disorientation, suggesting that she too might become a figure trapped between recognition and erasure. In the film's world, the living drift closer to stillness, while the still seem poised to awaken an equilibrium that blurs categories the audience expects to remain distinct. Through these figures, Bava constructs a symbolic landscape where identity is fragile, perception unreliable, and selfhood always on the verge of slipping into silence. Fact 19. Upon its European release, Lisa and the Devil confounded critics who expected Bava to deliver another stylistically bold yet narratively accessible horror work. Instead, they encountered a film that resisted interpretation at every turn, an opulent enigma whose emotional weight lay not in plot but in atmosphere and repetition. Many reviewers labeled it impenetrable, describing its structure as a fever dream without a waking point, or a riddle uninterested in answers. Others argued that Bava had abandoned discipline in favor of aesthetic indulgence, failing to recognize that the film's disorientation was intentional, not accidental. Yet small pockets of cinephiles praised its ambition, seeing in its fractured timeline and symbolic density a precursor to later explorations of psychological surrealism. Over the decades, reassessment shifted dramatically. Film scholars began positioning it as one of Bava's most personal works, a meditation on memory and identity that anticipated themes explored by auteurs such as Lynch and Ruiz. Retrospective screenings revealed viewers newly receptive to its non-linear logic, recognizing that the film's power stems from its refusal to resolve meaning neatly. The ambiguities once criticized as flaws became essential components of its allure. Critics who revisited the film noted how its destabilizing rhythms demand active interpretation, making each viewing a unique experience shaped by the audience's emotional state. As appreciation grew, so did recognition of the courage required to create a film unconcerned with conventional coherence. The earlier backlash now appears rooted less in the film's shortcomings than in its departure from what audiences expected horror to be at the time. In its afterlife, Lisa and the Devil has transformed from misunderstood oddity into a cornerstone of cult cinema, an enduring reminder that some stories must first be rejected before they can be fully seen. Fact 20. Years after the film's release, Mario Bava offered rare reflections that shed light on Lisa and the Devil while preserving its central mystery. In an interview late in his career, he revealed that the film grew from a recurring childhood dream, a space where hallways branched into new hallways, and silent figures watched him with neither malice nor affection. He admitted that no script could capture the dream's emotional logic, which is why he allowed the narrative to drift, fracture, and fold in on itself. When asked about the film's ambiguous chronology, Bava explained that he did not see time as a linear thread but as a series of overlapping impressions, each capable of influencing the others. He felt Lisa's journey mirrored the experience of confronting parts of oneself that have been forgotten or suppressed, and he embraced the idea that characters might behave according to memories the audience had not yet witnessed. Viewers hoping for a definitive interpretation were met with quiet resistance. Bava insisted that the mannequins, the looping spaces, and Savalas's enigmatic presence were not puzzles to decode, but emotional markers, symbols meant to evoke recognition rather than explanation. When pressed on whether the butler represented death, fate, or the subconscious, he smiled and replied, "He represents whatever enters the room before thought does." His cryptic remarks offered insight without closure, reinforcing the film's refusal to be pinned down. Even in discussing his work, Bava preserved the tension between clarity and enigma. His reflections confirmed what admirers long suspected: Lisa and the Devil was not designed to be solved, but to linger an echo of a dream that continues reshaping itself every time someone dares to step back into its corridors. Bonus fact: during the film's restoration in the late 1992, archivists uncovered a peculiarity that deepened Lisa and the Devil's already formidable mystique: a single, unexplained shot appearing in multiple workprints, yet absent from every script, call sheet, or production report. The fragment lasted less than 2 seconds, a mannequin's face framed in tight close-up, its cracked cheek glinting under a faint, shifting light, as though someone were moving just out of frame. What unsettled the restoration team was not merely the shot's lack of documentation, but its behavior. In one print, it appeared between unrelated dialogue scenes. In another, it surfaced moments before a corridor sequence. In a third, it materialized near the film's end, interrupting a transition with no technical splice marks to explain the intrusion. Chemical analysis confirmed the footage matched the original stock used during principal photography, eliminating the possibility of a later insertion, yet no surviving crew member recognized the image, and no corresponding mannequin existed among the cataloged props. Some speculated it was a lighting test accidentally preserved across versions, but the composition, precise focus, deliberate framing, and a subtle rack pulling attention toward the mannequin's damaged cheek suggested intentional artistry. One archivist noted that the crack in the figure's face resembled damage seen on a different mannequin, except that the prop in question was pristine when filmed. Theories emerged: an abandoned scene, a symbolic footnote, a misfiled experiment, or even an echo of Bava's unseen dream imagery slipping into the film's material fabric. Ultimately, the shot remained unclaimed, a ghost fragment embedded in the film's celluloid memory. Rather than remove it, archivists left the anomaly, preserved a flicker of uncertainty that captures the film's essence, an image both present and unmoored, insisting on being witnessed even when no explanation follows. If the world of Lisa and the Devil has pulled you into its looping corridors, where mannequins breathe in silence, where time folds without warning, and where every shadow feels like a memory returning, share with us which revelation struck you the deepest. Like this video if you want more explorations into films that blur the boundaries between dream and reality, and subscribe so you never miss another descent into cinema's hidden histories. And now, a question only your perspective can answer. Is Lisa and the Devil a story about fate unraveling, identity dissolving, or the fear of meeting the version of ourselves we no longer recognize? Tell us in the comments and suggest the next film whose secrets you want us to uncover.